It's a new day. It's February. We're leaning into what God has to do in this month. It's Black History Month. And
Black
so
History Month. It
about
is.
that. Yeah. And I thought it would be even that much more valuable to lean into that subject on this podcast and get better together.
Family, multiplication, restoration. I'm Heiden Lewis. Join me, Noah Oldham and Heiden Ratner, as we come to you from Atlanta, St. Louis, and Las Vegas, as we seek to add value to your church planting journey. We'll have real-time, authentic conversations that are relevant to the life of the church planter and pastor. Join us as we hear from leaders of this movement from across North America and discover what it really takes to plant churches everywhere for everyone.
Welcome to another episode of the We Are Send Network podcast. My name is Noah Oldham, the lead pastor of August Gate in St. Louis, joined as always by Heiden Ratner, the senior pastor of Walk Church in Las Vegas, Nevada. Heiden, how we doing today, brother?
Hey, man, I'm doing great. It's a new day. It's February. We're leaning into what God has to do in this month. It's Black History Month. And
Black History Month. It is.
About that. Yeah. And I thought it would be even that much more valuable to lean into that subject on this podcast and get better together. So let's get it, man.
Absolutely. And with Dahadi being off today, we had the great opportunity to bring on a special guest, and none better really for anything we want to talk about network wide is my good friend, my personal friend, Michael Byrd from Faith Community Bible Church in St. Louis. Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Man, it is so good to be here. Noah, man, I love you, bro. Always good to hear your voice and see you. I need to talk to Heiden about these cornbread crumble cookies that he been eating.
Ooh.
We got to talk about those, man.
That's funny, man. Hey, you know what? We can get some shipped out to you guys from the West Coast, the Best Coast.
Oh, man.
And I'll send you some honey buns.
That's right. Mike likes those honey buns.
It's a good trade-off. Man, it's honor to have you here, Pastor Mike. I'm glad that you're on with us, and we're going to lean in today. It's good.
Absolutely. As I said, Michael is a close personal friend of mine, one of my very best friends, confidants, advisors. This dude speaks into my life so much. And not everybody on our network gets to know him, though. And so, Michael, just if you would, man, share with us a little bit about your family and your church.
Awesome. Again, as they stated, my name is Michael Byrd. I have the awesome privilege to have been married to the Tracy Byrd for the last 16 years. We just celebrated 16 years about a week and a half ago. So super grateful for her, and I love her so much and thankful to be her husband. We have 4 kids, and they are all older. So we're turning a good corner, getting ready to be empty nesters within the next 5 years. So really excited about that. Born and raised St. Louis, planted Faith Community Bible Church here in North St. Louis City. We celebrate 5 years this year. So super excited about that. Yeah.
Man, what a journey. Great. Yeah. The joke around St. Louis is Michael is now introduced as bishop because he's now pastoring 2 churches, a church that was planted by somebody else and was found itself in a transition. And Michael came in, and now we have 2 locations of Faith Community Bible Church. And he actually got introduced at a church planting event recently as Bishop Byrd, which was pretty fun.
Come on, Bishop Byrd in the house. Let's get it.
Yeah. Hey, what was funny is that somebody actually came up. So did I miss your consecration? I said, no, it was a joke.
Oh, that's fantastic. Hey, as Heiden mentioned, it's February and it's Black History Month. And I think it's an opportunity for us to celebrate the distinct and the unique and specific gifts and just accomplishments of Black people in the missional space, in the church planting space. And Mike, I know this is something you're really passionate about. You've educated me in a number of ways. And so, man, let's just jump in here from the get-go. Let's talk about why it's important for us to acknowledge and recognize the Black contribution to church planting and mission culture everywhere. Mike, take us away, man.
Man, that's so good. Like, and just thinking through this, y'all, it's been super encouraging, even to me, to process. Because a lot of times we think about Black History Month or Black inventions, we think about people like Madam C.J. Walker or George Crumb, right, who created the potato chip, or or George Washington Carver and peanut butter, right?
Yeah.
Which all of that is good. Hallelujah, right? But there's so much more, specifically as it pertains to living on mission and being servants for Jesus, that we really just don't think about. People like George Liao, the first African-American missionary, or the first Black missionary. You think about Paul Cuffey and Lot Carey. There's so many Black men and women who have paved the way for us to even serve today. And for so long, man, it just goes overlooked, you know. And I'm for one is just super thankful even for the opportunity to even just go back and think about and process some of those pioneers who paved the way for me to be able to do what we do today.
Yeah, helpful. Yeah, I think about George Liao and learning about some of his story. And I think Black History Month is a great month. It shouldn't be the only month, but it definitely should be an emphasized month that we take moments to really lean in and get better and learn history, especially from missionaries like George, right? Because I'm a big fan of William Carey and his missionary journey and following his journals and documents on the way. And he's often known as the father of missions, but right, George took the gospel to Jamaica 10 years before Carey left. Yeah. And so I was unaware of that until I started saying, I want to be intentional to learn from some of the greatest missionaries of all time. This is a great month to do that. I think it's not just going to deepen your appreciation for Black culture and Black missionaries that have been doing this thing, but it's going to help you get better. It's going to help put some tools in your tool belt.
Yeah. You know, what was interesting to me in this is just really rethinking and really being convicted on how I view mission, right? Yeah. Growing up as a kid in church, like either I'll just lean into the fact that I probably wasn't paying attention like I was supposed to. I mean, I know like Noah came out the womb saved, running to see what the end gonna be, right? But I just like maybe I didn't pay attention, but I don't really remember mission being something that was really put out on the forefront, right? I mean, I knew I was in a church that was, super old, like 40, 50, 60, 70 years old at the time. But and it didn't click in my mind until I really got involved in mission and really got a biblical view on mission, that even all of those years later, I was a part of a missional church. The church that I grew up at as a kid, which was Mercy Seat Baptist Church, in today's language, was planted in 1918 by a guy named Reverend Starks. Right? Today, that church this year celebrates 103 years, and they still exist today. And in our network, we have this big thing where we talk about multiplication, discover, develop, deploy. And when we think about that, this church has sent out at least 15 missionaries, be it police chaplains or church planters or revitalizers. Like even thinking about, I even thought about the church that my wife grew up at, which was right around the corner from the church I was at. They were planted in 1898 by this guy. Here it is. His name, they called him Sin Killing Griffin. Right? I was like, name. That's a missionary name right there.
Sin Killing Griffin. Come on.
Sin Killing Griffin, right? And this year, that church celebrates 123 years. And sent out at least 5 missionaries that I can count. And again, these churches still exist. One of the largest churches here in St. Louis, they were planted in 1955. That church is now led by the guy who planted the church, is led by his grandson. And they too have sent out 2 churches that we know of today. Right. And I'm just like, man, all this good missional history that we just overlook and miss right in our neighborhoods just because, I mean, maybe we ignore it. Maybe we don't focus in on it. But mission is mission. Right. And I just think that like what would happen if the church began to celebrate that?
Yeah.
Dude, well said.
Michael, I think what's so huge about this is Black History Month is an opportunity really for education out of ignorance. And I don't mean ignorance in a derogatory term. I just mean lack of knowledge. growing
Sure.
up in the spaces that I did, I grew up in a small denomination that was not connected to anybody outside of this small denomination. So there wasn't any kind of pedigree or history to pull from. It wasn't until I went to seminary that I began to learn about church history. And even then, it was like getting through a couple courses really, really fast. But 10 years ago or 11 years ago now, when Send North America started as an initiative for the North American Mission Board, Southern Baptists said, we're going to get into these spaces where our denomination has not really had a strong presence. Cities, but more specifically, non-South cities. And when we did that, it meant like a convergence of cultures like never before. And I know that some of the narrative, when you come out of just a lack of knowledge, is you just assume that there's nobody else there. You're coming in to start something new. You got to learn the city. But one of the things I was so surprised by when I moved to St. Louis all these years ago now was that there is a really strong presence of Black churches all over St. Louis. That are there, that have been meeting for a long time, that have been doing the work. And it's that I remember when God really convinced my heart, Noah, you're not here to start a movement. You're here to join the movement that I began a long time ago.
Come on.
That I'm welcoming you into. You've noticed that too, Heiden, out in Vegas. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit unique for me because I'm, I guess, what you call an indigenous church planter. This is my home. I grew up in Las Vegas. But I also grew up very lost and unengaged with the gospel. Nobody ever invited me to church in my first 18 years of living. So no youth camp, no youth group, etc. And so I felt like I was a missionary back to my hometown, but I knew my city. And so I was grateful for that and grateful for some initiative from Send Network. One other thing I think that is tailored to this conversation a little bit more as well, though, is, when I think about my story and growing up in Las Vegas, I grew up in Black culture predominantly because being an athlete, being a basketball player, I can remember many a times on AAU circuits being the only, I guess, I felt very minority-ish in gyms, but it wasn't weird. It was family. And so I feel like, for me specifically, even as a non-Black individual and church planter, this conversation, whether it be around racial reconciliation or just this time of celebrating Black History Month, is just so important for our network and for planters, pastors, to grow in the area of empathy, to grow in the area of one another. I think that, we got to be careful to not divorce the Great Commandment from the Great Commission. You know what I'm saying? Where, we're called to make disciples, but man, we're called to love people the way Christ loves us. I found that I'm starting to love other cultures the more I learn about them. I was recently watching a Bruce Lee documentary. It was a 30 for 30 on ESPN on Bruce Lee. And, I was just getting to know his story. They were documenting how he kind of came up and started his acting career. And not to get too sidetracked here, but in his acting career, he was getting treated and paid way less than the majority culture that he was filming with. And he said, you know what, since the segregation amongst Asian Americans is so bad, he said, I'm going to take my talents to China. I'm going to do work out there because I'm honored and appreciated in my culture. And I think that I was like, man, I'm getting an appreciation for Asian culture just by learning more of Bruce Lee's story. When I think about Black History Month, man, I'm reading a narrative on Frederick Douglass' life for this month that I just wanted to spend some time with, to just get to know more of his journey in the late 1800s. And I'm like, maybe me and Byrd were in class goofing off. I missed his story, but there's so much fruit and so much freshness in getting to learn more about him, and not just him, but the theological pedigree and credibility that comes from a lot of our Black brothers and sisters. But specifically, let me remind us of Athanasius, Tertullian, who coined the term the Trinity, Augustine, right? Like, these guys were killers, man, in a good way, right? Sin-killing Griffin. And Acts chapter 13, verse 1 talks to us about these early prophets. One of them named Simon who's also called Niger. And I remember reading that passage, and ESV gave you a little footnote for what the phrase Niger meant, and meant black man. You know, so I'm like, man, I love how even the text in the book of Acts is acknowledging color here and not doing it in a negative way, but doing it in a celebration way. And so I think what we're doing on this podcast is right, is timed up. I'd love to hear Bishop Byrd take us deeper into the conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, man. You are spot on, man. Like, you know, so for me, you know, really diving into like a lot of the history, even of African-American missionaries, I really knew nothing about. Because I really just didn't do the homework at that time to dig deeper. Because when we talked about, like for me growing up, mission was the WMU, right? And I mean, that was what it was. And not only did I not know what the WMU was, but I never really saw it active, you know. But it wasn't really until I bumped heads with a guy at an event here in St. Louis. Noah, you may know him. His name is Noah. He talked about like being called to be on mission. Like for me, I'm like, yeah, I'm called to start a church. He's like, no, you're called to be a missionary. I'm like, well, good. What's that? I can't be a part of the WMU. I know the W stand for women. You know what I mean? So really just doing the homework, man. Like, you know, I find out, man, that like one of the reasons why I was having such a difficult time was that for me, you know, church planting wasn't looked at for those around me as missionary work. It was just like dudes would disagree with something that their pastor said or did, so they would go start a church to show them they can do it better. Right? So really trying to really wrap my mind around that. Yeah, I mean, I felt alone. I felt like I had no examples. But then I begin to hear about guys that I can actually reach out and touch. Right? Like a Floyd Morris. I preached my first sermon at Mercy Seat, but Floyd Morris planted a church called Perfect Peace in St. Louis, right? Lived on mission where he was and invited me to preach. That was the second time I had ever preached outside of, you know, my home church. Thinking about Edward Gibson, again, planted a church in inner city St. Louis, right? Hilliard Martin, somebody who I was like, oh, you know, I wonder what he's doing. But until the day he died several years ago, he was a missionary on the police department. He was a chaplain, right? I think about even today, Pastor Ben Chandler serving right here in my city, right? Revitalizing the church here. This church had maybe 6 members when he took over the church, but by him pastoring those people and loving them as a missionary, their church has grown to a little over 100 people since he's been there, right? I think about Pastor Keelan Atkinson, planted a church right here in St. Louis, who now has moved to Greensboro, North Carolina, and planted, hear this, a SBC church. They're an African-American man, the Word Church, and is doing great right there. Like these are the guys that I was able to learn from, guys like Leland Hope, who planted Bethany Baptist Church, or Melvin Smotherson, who planted Cornerstone Church, or Fred Norris, who served as a missionary, hear this, in nursing homes, right? Those who, you know, really living out and serving the least of these. So like I don't, like, somebody would like, well, why won't we talk about Daniel Coker from 1820, or Colin Teague from 1821, or John Day from 1830? Man, I celebrate God for what everybody who paved the way for us, you know, is doing. But I just can't take my mind right now off of the fact that there's 15 or 16 folks like that I just know of that I can that I could have reached out and touched. And I didn't honor them while they're here. So today I want to give them their flowers, because
that's good.
I'm the man I am today because those guys paved the way.
Man, such a good word, man.
Honestly, if I can have my way, I want to change the narrative for inner city church planting. I want folks to know, yes, God is still calling missionaries today.
It's good.
Come on.
That's a great segue, Mike, because I want to get in this before we're done. You talked about the past. Black History Month is an opportunity for us to celebrate the past. You just got done celebrating a little bit of the present of like, hey, these are people that poured into your life and are here right now doing great missionary work. But for a moment, let's turn our attention to the future. Because if we're going to be a network that plants churches everywhere for everyone, if we want to see a healthy, multiplying church in every community across North America, that is going to be a diverse project. And we are going to need to lean into and lean on the leadership and the unique and specific accomplishments of Black men and women in our network. And so, Mike, I know that you have spoken to this. You're doing things in your church. What do we need to go? What do we need to encourage? And how do we help? How do we cheer on our Black church planters as they look to the future and what they are doing and what need to do to see this movement perpetuated out of what they're doing currently?
Oh man, that's a great question. One of the things that I would say, guys, is number one, we always got to remain biblical. Right?
Yeah, man.
And I mean, yeah, that goes without saying, but does it really? Because, you know, I want to preface that right away, because Scripture does not call us to comfort. Scripture calls us to unity, right? And one of the things that I tell our church all the time is that that God doesn't care about our comfort. If he did, he would have named us Silly Posturepedic, right? But that's not what he named us. Like we're called to unity and not comfort. So that means that some of the times we have to not only have difficult conversations, but be a part of networks or denominations where it may not always be easy. But I'm gonna tell you something, right? Like Noah and I are in deep relationship together because we invested the time. We had hard conversations, but we invested that time together. And I think that if we want to see our network move forward, if we want to invest in African-American leaders or whatever the case may be within our cities, then we have got to pursue Scripture more than we pursue comfort and do what's necessary to have the difficult conversations. Again, I mean, if it's about the kingdom, then we have to know something that we say all the time. It's not about the name that's on the back of the jersey, it's about the name that's on the front. Right? Wow. We are all on the same team, and that's to make Christ known, and we should want to do that.
Yeah. Mike, tell us about what you're doing in your church to raise up future leaders. I want people to understand this, that it's not necessarily the big suburban church with all this business background raising up leaders that's going to perpetuate this mission. It is literally a church plant that in the inner city that says, hey, we see a vision for the future and we want it to look different. What are you doing right now to see that perpetuated?
Man, that's so good. So when we think about developing leaders, the idea there really is less than 1 or 2% of our church will turn out church planters. But what I do know is the men at our church will father children. They will have wives. They will serve on their jobs, right? What I do know is that the women will nurture their children. They will love their husbands. While they may not be church planters or ever serve on a church plant team, we do know that they are called to be leaders. They're called to do ministry and do mission where life exists. So everything that we do is about developing leaders, right? We want guys to know that, like, hey, you can be a leader and never preach a sermon. Maybe that means that you need to lead the bathroom ministry. That's fine. Maybe that means, right, we need you to go and lead the prayer walking ministry. That's fine. But taking advantage of every opportunity that we can to pour into those men and women to see them give God glory in all that they're doing. Now, we do have a preaching lab and where we invest in men who feel called to preach. There is guys within this lab, right, where we like, you know what, we do really sense that you will pastor one day. But before you plant a church, you got to learn how to live the word, right? Because we don't want to be guilty of developing men who articulate the gospel but don't live the gospel. Because hot water heats up the pipe first. And we want these guys to be boiling with truth so much so that it affects their character and their integrity. So just finding ways, man, where we can just really encourage our men to serve where they are now, with the hopes that from that, like, God will raise up leaders, the next church planters, the next deacons, the next missionaries who will go overseas to follow the George Lyles and all of those others that went before us to push back lostness across the globe.
Come on. So good, man. Love how you put that, Mike. That's great, man. Love how you're doing that. I love how you're doing that already. You're an example of what we're talking about. You know, we want to celebrate the past, want to celebrate the current, and we want to celebrate the future work that's going to come out of your house. And, you know, Noah, hey, if I could just add one more thing that was just speaking to me just now from Bishop Byrd, man. Like, I love how you just recalled, I think 15 different names, first and last names of Black brothers and sisters, pastors, leaders, and their church names. And there's affinity, there's relationship, there's context. And that's just primarily in the Lou, right? Yeah. And I'm thinking, man, I think that's one of, if Noah, you didn't ask me the question, I'm not offended, bro. But if I were to answer the question, you know, what's one way for the future? I think it's going to be relationship. It's going to be getting to know more brothers, sisters, pastors. There's a lot of really strong Black women of God that are leading well in different spaces that we can learn from. And I think that, you know, I want to do a better job in not just celebrating a month of accomplishment, etc. But man, I want to go deeper in my relationships with minority leaders across our city first. And that's something that I caught from you today, Pastor Mike, is you have that. And then that creates open doors for real conversations, even for if there happens to be a correction or if I need correction, you know, like there's that one anothering if that relationship's established. And I just think, man, it takes intentionality at a high level. And so I caught that today. I like how my brother, Pastor Brian Crawford, says it out of Mississippi. He's also a Send Network Black planter, him and his wife Candy. And he just says, Heiden, learn the story. You'll get better the more you learn the story. And you'll grow in love the more you learn the story. You'll grow in empathy the more you learn the story. And so I think that's what that has to do with Jesus and his story. And that has to do with other culture stories, specifically Black culture here today. So, man, I feel better. I feel charged up. I feel like I've grown through this podcast, and I'm honored to be a part of it, man. Amen.
Michael Byrd, thank you for joining us for this episode, brother. It is always good to see you. I know this is going to be helpful for everyone listening. Hey, for those who are listening, thank you for joining us for another episode of the We Are Send Network podcast. As always, hit that subscribe button, like and share. Spread the word about what God is doing in Send Network. If you want to know more information about planting with the Send Network, just check us out at sendnetwork.com, or you can text the words Send Network to 888-123. 888-123. And until next time, we are Send Network.
You have been listening to We Are Send Network, a resource of the North American Mission Board. For more information about today's podcast and other relevant resources, visit sendnetwork.com.